We are at Ruth chapters 3 and 4. So truth be told, I was going to do chapters 2 and 3 last week, but there was just a lot to talk about in chapter 2. So now I've got 2 chapters to cover, 3 and 4 this week. And it turns out there's a lot to talk about in all 4 chapters. And so we'll get through as much of this as I can as we go here. So we'll try to keep it moving today. So just by way of review, here's some things we've talked about. In week 1, the title of the sermon was Call Me Bitter, because if you remember, in the first 5 verses of the book, Naomi loses everything. Husband, her nation, she goes away, she loses her children, loses everything. That seems, like everything we know about Naomi is stripped from her identity. And so when she gets back to Bethlehem at the end of that chapter, she says, just don't even call me Naomi anymore, which means something like pleasant. She says, call me Mara, which is bitter. Call me bitter. My life is bitter. And we talked about the implications of that. We talked about the implications of evil, suffering, struggle in the world, and how that's compatible with a God that loves us and cares for us. And honestly, that's just a really difficult question. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to the problem of evil and all that raises. It's something that I think you just have to kind of walk through, and we've continued to kind of track that as we've gone through here. Last week's sermon was called Field of Dreams. Ruth goes out to the field. She makes this pretty bold request. Like, she wants to glean in a special place. But Ruth is not a special person. And why do I say that? Because she's the most insignificant of all possible people. She's not even a slave. Like, she's less than a slave, really. She's a foreigner. She has no status, no standing, no right to ask anything special be given to her. She asks Boaz anyway, can I glean among the sheaves in the field? And Boaz's response, and we'll see a similar response to today's request, is immediate and radical generosity. It says, absolutely. In fact, I'll give you more than you've even asked for. What a beautiful picture of generous response to someone's struggle and need. But we know in the background here, we have these 2 phrases. Remember, the first sentence of the book of Ruth is, this took place in the time when the judges ruled Israel. Well, the 2 main kind of lines that come out of the book of Judges is that in those days, Israel had no king, and so everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And that's bad, right? We should be doing what's right in God's eyes. And ultimately, we should have a king. Really, we should have a king that's God himself, right? But that's the message. That's what's going on in the background. Everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. Israel has no king. Yet we see in this book a pattern for hope. And the pattern for hope we saw is this. In the first chapter, remember, they leave Bethlehem because of a famine, even though the name Bethlehem means house of bread. And there's a famine in the house of bread, which seems ironic, right? But by the end of that chapter, they return to Bethlehem. Why? Because the Lord has given food, generously provided food for his people in the house of bread. And so what does that mean? It means that that God helped Bethlehem to live up to its name. When it was emptied, the Lord filled it. And we've been asking this question, is there anything else in the book? Perhaps Naomi, right, who doesn't feel like she's living up to her name. And is it possible that an active work of the Lord might fill her again? And that's the story we've been following here. And so we'll see its thrilling conclusion today. Okay. So the first part, devising a plan. We're going to see this. I'll read this passage. This is the first part I'm going to read is from Ruth 3, 1 through 5. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you, where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor." Notice one important thing that probably can slip by you in this section. My daughter, I must find a home for you. And he's a relative of ours. What does that imply? That implies that Ruth has a status now in Israel, which is really interesting. Ruth is part of the family, really. Like, she really has this kind of, and we talked about that last week as Boaz's response sort of gives Ruth status. But now Naomi is taking it upon herself to kind of fulfill motherly duties toward a daughter and help her to find a husband and a place of security, right? So that's another kind of theme here that's going on. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. I will do whatever you say, Ruth answered. Okay. So in this passage, there's a couple things going on. One is we see Ruth's status as a part of the family, which I think is important. We also see this going on. Naomi and Ruth hatch a plan. They devise a plan here. If you've never seen the movie Mulan from Disney, then you'll have no idea that that's Mulan, and that that's from the scene at the beginning when she goes to visit the matchmaker, and there's this song about the way to bring honor to your family is by finding a husband and creating a happy home and that sort of thing. If you don't know anything more about it, then that's not my fault. It's not my fault you haven't watched the movie. I don't have to explain it any further to you. You just have to be better in the future. But that's all I'll say. Okay. So here's a question I have for us to think about. So one thing I like to think about as I teach through Scripture is helping people kind of track how it is that you can draw truth out of Scripture. I think that's an important thing to communicate to. So here's a question we'll use as kind of a guiding question today. In this passage, Naomi's like, I've got an idea, Ruth. Pretty yourself up, go to this place and ask this guy to be your husband. She puts a plan into motion, right? She devises a plan. Let me give you a couple other examples of people who devise plans or construct plans in Scripture. One is Eve. So one way you can think about Eve in the Garden of Eden, she looks at the fruit. The serpent comes along and sort of helps with this. But she looks at the fruit that she's not supposed to eat. She says it looks good. It looks good for food. It looks good for knowledge, wisdom, those sorts of things, right? And so she thinks, here's an idea. I could just eat the fruit, right? And the serpent says, maybe I'll become like God as I do, right? And so what Eve does is she grasps at the fruit and she takes it. She eats it, right? And in Scripture, that's taken to be a negative thing. Whatever plan Eve put into motion, that was a bad thing. Here's another example. Andrew mentioned this when he was praying for Jordan and Rochelle, this case, Sarah and Abraham. Sarah is waiting. They have this promise from the Lord. We're going to give you a child. I'm going to give you and Abraham a child. And then she waits, I think it's 10 years of barrenness, not having a child, a long period of time, right? And then what does she do? She hatches a plan. She devises a plan. She says, well, I've got this servant, Hagar. I could give her to Abraham. We could have a child. So if you know the story of the book of Genesis, you know that turns out poorly as well, right? And they mistreat Hagar, Ishmael, and Isaac, the two sons that kind of come out of this whole thing, are in conflict with one another. There's a lot of trouble. So we've got a couple examples in the background of people who devised plans to bring about God's blessing in their lives. And I want to say that both of the things that Eve and Sarah were grasping at were good things. Eve was grasping at wisdom and knowledge, which are exactly the same things that Joseph at the end of the book of Genesis is praised for. We talked about this in the Sunday school class I taught this last year. Pharaoh says, who has this wisdom and knowledge? Like, who could possibly, rule over Egypt and guide us through this famine and all this stuff? And it's that same phrase. So that thing that Eve is grasping at, Joseph has, and Joseph is praised for. It's a good thing she grasps at. And, of course, in Sarah's case, the thing that she's grasping at is something that's been promised to her by God, right? A child, right? So they're grasping at good things. Here's the question that I want us to kind of have in the background. Why is it the case that for Sarah and Eve, that when they hatched their plans, it was bad? Yet in this case, we're going to see that Naomi hatches a plan, and it doesn't have that connotation. It doesn't have that implication. It's not treated as bad. In fact, it's treated as a good thing, if anything. So there's a question in the background. And it's an important question because I suspect there's lots of times in your life where you need something or have something, feel like you're losing something, whatever. There's something important that's at stake. And you feel like maybe you could devise a plan to take it or to get it, to bring about that blessing, that important thing in your life. And so what we want to do is we want to stop for a second and think, what's the difference between people who devise plans that work as a part of God's plan versus people who devise plans that seem to work against God's plan? What's the difference? So we'll see. I think we'll see some hints about what it is that Ruth and Boaz, in this case, do that separates them from those other cases. But I'll let you kind of think about that as we go. So that's the first part. Let's keep moving, though. So the threshing floor. Here's a picture of an old threshing floor. This one looks like stones were brought in and kind of laid out. Sometimes it was hard, compact ground on a threshing floor. Sometimes it was bedrock maybe that was exposed. But there's a picture of one. But, okay, well, I'm going to start reading in verse 6 now of chapter 3. So she, Ruth, went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." Our family. Remember, she's part of the family now. That's a kind of a beautiful picture. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." It's a phrase that comes out of Proverbs 31. "Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good. Let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized, and he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing, and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. Okay. So a couple things going on here. One is, here's one theme that's in this section: acceptance of the foreigner. Okay. So this is not a theme that I've pulled out and have really focused on, but this is a really important and critical theme through the book of Ruth. And there's just too much to really talk about, but this is one of the really important themes. And I want to at least acknowledge it here. Ruth has a status. She's Naomi's daughter, like I mentioned, like really her daughter, to the point where Naomi is going to exercise motherly duty toward her, make sure she finds a secure place for her. Ruth presents her to Boaz as a potential wife. Just the fact that she would even think that she was a candidate to be somebody's wife, in this case, is implicating that she has this sort of status, assuming this status in the Jewish culture, that she's a marriageable sort of woman, despite being a Moabite, which we talked about last week. Boaz also acknowledges that her character had made it clear that she's worthy of being a wife. I think when the Old Testament talks about like salvation experiences, it's not really in the language that like we might talk about it today, where someone had like this salvation, conversion experience or something like that. Maybe sometimes it is. But a lot of times what you see in the Old Testament is you just see that like the way that you tell whether someone's living for the Lord is that you see that they live out the Lord's commands. They do what the Lord says. And if you've been following along at all through the book of Ruth, you know that Ruth has done definitely that. We'll talk a little bit more today about how she's probably done even more than that. She's not just like doing just enough to sort of satisfy those. She's really living an exemplary kind of life of character, which we'll talk more about today. So that's another indication that she really is part of God's family here. And so the reason why I want to point this out is because I don't know if that applies to you ever. I don't know if you ever think about God's family, God's church, and if you ever feel like an outsider or somebody who doesn't belong, or things just don't click, or it's just not natural for you, or you've got some baggage in the background, something you've done or something that you are that you feel like excludes you from receiving God's blessings. I don't know if that's you or not. I don't know if that's been you. I don't know if that will be you in the future at some point. I have no idea. But if it is you, come back and read the book of Ruth again, because there's a strong theme here that says it doesn't really matter, your origin story, so to speak, isn't what the Lord is judging you based on, right? The Lord is welcoming you into his family based on how you approach him now, how you receive him now, right? And the Lord can redeem anything and everything, and wants to redeem anything and everything that comes to him. And so I wanted to at least acknowledge that before now moving on, and not really talking about that theme anymore. But it's there, and if you have questions about that, talk to me. Talk to somebody about it. I'd be happy to. Another theme that comes out here, loyal love. So Ruth acts again out of loyalty to family. So the idea here is when we just read, remember he said this is greater than the kindness. This was in verse 10. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. And here's what Boaz says. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And so there's an implication here. There's an implication that it seems that at some point Ruth could have pursued some other option for a husband through whatever means that looks like. And there could have been some way that she could have pursued other men, younger men, wealthier men, for passion, for wealth, for whatever reasons. And she didn't do that. The only indication we get about why she might not have done that is that she probably didn't do that because what was her main commitment in chapter 1? It was she was committed to Naomi, right? To take care of Naomi. And so there's this sense in which it's finding a husband through this process of a kinsman redeemer, which connects her to that family of Naomi, which is the way that ultimately I think cares for Naomi and takes care of Naomi at the end of the day. And it seems like we get a picture of Ruth waiting around, not running after the first guy that comes along, right, or first option that comes along, but waiting for a time where she can sort of satisfy her needs in this way, in a way that cares for Naomi as well. I think that's an important sort of observation here as we think about in what ways is Ruth being loyal, who's she being loyal to. She sets aside all these personal motivations, all those things she gave up in chapter 1 that were important to her, a husband, status, nation, all that stuff. She set that aside, and she's kept it set to the side until the right time. She hasn't just sort of like picked them up again at the first opportunity. That's a real picture of devotion and commitment. It's worth emulating, I think. Okay, so here's a theme that we'll talk about a couple times today, receiving and not grasping. And here I think this is we start to get an answer to our question about what's the difference between Naomi and Ruth hatching a plan versus maybe Sarah and Eve and some of these other examples. So remember everything that Ruth gave up to stay with Naomi. She gave up a husband, family, a nation. She gave up status. She gave up security, all of that, just so she could stay with Naomi. And now it seems like she had opportunities to run after and pursue those things again, take them up, right? However, she didn't grasp at those things. She acted slowly, she acted thoughtfully, and she acted with other people in mind. So she didn't grasp at any of these things that we thought were important. Remember when week 1 when I talked about these like identity issues, things that are really important to who you are, and you kind of measure your worth and your value by these things. And we saw Naomi stripped of all those things. We see Ruth willingly give up all those things. And we see Ruth, again, continue to lay those things down, patiently waiting, right, on the Lord. That's a picture of someone who is holding her hand out, asking for something boldly, like Ruth asked to glean among the sheaves, and then what did she do? She waited. She waited for an answer. So she didn't grasp at it. She didn't take it. She didn't try to sneak up there and take the grain, anything like that, right? She waited to find favor in somebody's eyes. And that's the picture we see again here with Ruth. Okay, so as we go on to the next section, I just reused a title from one of my slides last week, and so I wait, because we're going to wait again. So let's see what happens in verses 16 through 18. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her, and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter," there's that phrase again, "wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." So, they put a plan into action, and then they wait expectantly, right? This is exactly, I think, the picture of Ruth going into the field last week saying, "Can I glean among the sheaves?" and waiting until Boaz comes along and says, "Okay." Right? Okay, so we've got that picture in the background. And so here's the idea. And so here's kind of how I want to get at the question that I asked earlier. What's the difference between, like devising a plan and trying to make God's blessing come about in your life, bring about God's blessing in your life, versus patiently waiting, and on the Lord to bring that blessing into your life? Here's kind of how I'm thinking about it, and maybe this will be helpful to you as well. I think what we're going to get in Scripture, when you think about a situation in your own life where you have something that's important, something that you think is really significant, really important to you, Of course, there could be examples where you think something's important, but it's not really. Well, let's set those examples aside. But suppose there's something that really is important and significant in your life. And suppose you're wondering, should I do something about this? Should I devise a strategy for bringing this in, getting this thing? Should I just wait on the Lord for doing it? I suspect the answer is something like this. In any particular case, the answer is somewhere between completely waiting on the Lord and doing nothing. That seems like usually probably it's a mistake, unless the Lord tells you to do that. Or completely planning in every step of the way and controlling everything. That's the other extreme, which probably is a bad thing. So the truth is somewhere in the middle. Like, you probably ought to be wise and prudent in your strategizing, your planning in your life. You also better be waiting on the Lord to fulfill those. So the question is, how is that help? That seems like the most unhelpful thing you could possibly say if someone's thinking about, like, what do I do in my situation, right? But I think that's what you're going to get when you go to Scripture. You're going to find a general principle like that the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think Eve and Sarah probably were a little too far toward the planning, controlling, taking, that phase of it. We see Ruth and Naomi, again, planning, strategizing, but also being patiently waiting, on the answer to their question, right? So how do you find those limits? Here's what I think the answer is for you. In your particular case, should you wait? Should you plan? Where should you draw those lines? I think what you should do is, to find the answer to that question, one is you should pray, of course, in contact with the Lord, constant contact. But also, going back to what we talked about in week 1, talking with other believers, I think, is critically important here too. If you've got a situation where it's difficult and you don't know how to do it, talk to people in the church, the people in the pews next to you, right? This is another important part where getting the wisdom of people around you, people who have lived through similar circumstances or whatever, that might be. What would they get a sense of, like, what would they do? How would they approach this? Where would they draw these lines? I think is really important to you as an individual to get that answer in your life. Because you're not going to find a verse in Scripture that says Tom Riley should do this in this situation. Like, it doesn't, Tom Riley's name doesn't appear in Scripture, right? So you're not going to get that specific. But we do get a principle about, a general principle. And then how do you apply it to a specific case? I think you talk with people. But what we have here is a picture of one, again, the picture that I want to paint is that where you might think of, if you're visualizing this, you might think of Eve reaching out her hand and grasping the fruit, taking it. You might think of Sarah reaching out and grasping a child, right, and taking it. I think the picture we have of Ruth is this open hand, right, where she says, here's what I need, Lord, and it's a bold request, and now I stand here and I wait for you to fill it. I think that's the picture that the book of Ruth paints for us. So I think that's an important part of answering that question about the distinction between different parts of the story. I think this has been, I've talked to you about our stories a couple times. So we'll return to a couple of the stories from the Otis family that I've been talking about and see how some of these themes have kind of unfolded. So I've talked to you the last couple of weeks about a core part of my identity is seeing myself as like a reliable provider for my family, being able to take care of my family. Okay. And we talked about this being my identity really being tested in a couple situations. One where I couldn't find a job for a long time, a permanent, kind of secure, stable job for a long time, for I don't know what it was, 8 years, something like that. A long time. And then we also talked about a case where we lost a house that we were living in, and we didn't have a place to live, a permanent place to live. And I think these cases are interestingly different in regard to exactly what we talked about with the attitude that Ruth is taking. I think in the case of the job, so just to give you my own kind of psychological analysis here, in the case of the job, I don't think I waited well. Certainly didn't wait well all the time for the Lord to fill that blessing. I think when I think about waiting for a job, I think about me striving, looking at every opportunity to grasp a job, find a job, take the job. What's the perfect job look like? Having my mind set on that. And then really not being open to receiving anything that's different from that picture that I had in my mind. Of like, here's my idea of what a stable, good job looks like. And what did that do? I think it caused me to miss a lot of the things that the Lord was doing along that way. So for 8 years or whatever of not having a secure job, going from semester to semester, patching part-time things together, temporary things together, all the while thinking about what the thing that I don't have, the perfect job, what it looks like, the stress that comes along with that, thinking about my identity as a reliable provider, reliable in scare quotes, right? Because it doesn't seem like I was a very reliable provider at all, right, for my family. And I think what's interesting about that case is that the place where I ended up getting a permanent, stable job at the University of Rochester was a department that I was actually working in way back then, from before I even started the job search. I was doing part-time work there, not really loving it, but seeing it as something where I just had to do it. It was like one of these necessary evils I just had to do. It was like a burden I had to bear. It was like one of the part-time things that I had to do, not really seeing it in that way. Ultimately, though, that's the thing that turned out, my presence in that department is the thing that I think led to the job that I ultimately got. I thought that was funny as I thought through it, because I think of Naomi at the end of chapter 1 saying, don't call me pleasant, call me bitter, because my circumstances are so bitter. All the while, the solution to her problem is walking to Bethlehem right beside her, right? It's there. It's there for, Ruth is right beside her. Ruth is the way that the Lord's going to work out this solution for Naomi the whole time. And Naomi couldn't see it. Why would she be able to see it? But the solution is right beside her. I think of myself in this job case thinking that too. Like, all the while, all through these stresses, anxieties, I was working in the department that would eventually give me that job. And I think that's an interesting picture. It's interesting because it challenges your, maybe it challenges your self-perception. Like, if you think you're pretty good at guessing what the Lord might be up to or the ways that the Lord might be working, I don't know. I sometimes think maybe I am, but clearly I'm not. You know, it really challenges that. You know, it pushes toward humility, I think. Contrast that, I think, with the case with our house. Again, remember, we lost a house that we were living in, and then we had some friends of ours let us stay in their house during this time so we had like a 6-month period where we had to figure all this out, from no ideas, no leads, nothing whatsoever, to figure all this out. However, I think, and maybe this is just born of maturity, the fact that this house thing happened 8 years or whatever later in the game than the job thing started happening. But I think we waited much better in the case of the house. I think in the case of the house, we waited with a sense of certainly urgency. We had 6 months, we got to figure this out, right? So certainly it was urgent. Certainly it was important. But I think we were able to wait with an attitude of open-handedness in the sense that we said, Lord, here's what we need. We need a house, and there's nothing we can really do about it. Like, here's what we have. Here's the resources that are available. That's it. So right now, you have to fill that role. And there were no houses available in Livonia. We didn't know where we were going to live. We didn't know if we were going to leave Livonia, if we were going to leave New York, if we were going to leave the country. We thought about a lot of possibilities during that time. Kind of went through our heads. But really, at the end of the day, we had just had no idea where we were going to live. If I was waiting in the way that I was waiting with the job, where I had this perfect picture in mind of what filling that problem would look like, then when our friends said we could stay in their house, I don't think, the way I would have looked at that was like, this is a temporary thing. It's not the real solution. It's just another insignificant or like incomplete fulfillment of, it doesn't really address the problem. It doesn't answer the problem or fill the need, right? But since we were waiting on the Lord, I think expectantly in that case, we were able to see that as one step in the right direction, right? This is a temporary fix, but it's a fix in the right direction, right? It's temporary. And then I think we have this whole, I don't have time to go through the whole story of how we ended up getting a house here in Livonia. But there's a lot of things that fell into place. Here's one thing that fell into place. We got the house before I got the job. So if you're we've got Hunter. Hunter's going to be a junior this year, so we give him life advice every now and then. Here's how you live your life. Here's one thing I'll never say to him: buy a house and then get a job. Right? I'll never say that to him. I'll never say that. But I think in our picture, and again, you talked to me about this afterwards. I think in our picture we saw a lot of breadcrumbs along the way where the Lord was clearly leading us toward this house, where we just had to walk through that door in faith, and we did. And it was good on the other side. And I think what's the takeaway from all that? I think probably we tie too much of our hope and fears and happiness on our circumstances. I think not having a job, not having a house, and seeing the Lord fill those needs, it shows me one thing. The Lord can very quickly, in a single day, turn your circumstances around anytime he wants. House, job, anything you want. And we've also seen, and this is the bitter pill to swallow, we also saw in Ruth chapter 1, the Lord can take away instantly. So when you're feeling high, feeling good, you've got that house in Livonia, and you've got that job at the University of Rochester, and things are going well for you, don't put too much, hope in those things, in those circumstances, right? Don't lose sight of the one who gave, right? And at the same time, when something's taken from you, you feel like you have something important, it's taken from you or being taken, or you fear that it might be taken from you, don't be too quick to move to bitterness, because the Lord can work for your good. And in the case of Ruth, and in the case of us, me with the job, the Lord was already devising a solution before you even knew there was a problem, right? Before Naomi's family was dead, Ruth had already married in, right? The solution was already there before Naomi had any idea that there was even a problem, right? I think that's an important picture to take away as well. Okay, so enough about us and our story. Let's see what happens with Ruth and Naomi as they wait. So we move into chapter 4. Meanwhile, Boaz, starting in verse 1, meanwhile Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the guardian redeemer, there's that phrase again, just as, isn't it coincidental that this other person would come along? The person he needed to talk to would come along at just the right time. If you've been following along again in the book of Ruth, you know that nothing that's happening here is random coincidence. So clearly the hand of the Lord is guiding all of this. So we see Boaz, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. I will redeem it," he said. This is the other guy. The other guy says, "I will redeem it." That's a turn of events, right? Boaz and Ruth are supposed to get together. What's going on here? Okay. Then Boaz said, "By the way," I added that, "on the day that you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the guardian redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." We got it. We got the conclusion we wanted. Boaz and Ruth, it's back on. Okay, so here's a couple things to point out here, too, from this section. Receiving, not grasping, part 2. So we look at Boaz now. Boaz clearly finds something attractive about Ruth. Maybe finds her physically attractive, I don't know, but certainly finds her character attractive. Certainly thinks she's a very marriageable woman, a strong candidate for a wife. He's made that clear. He's recognized her character a couple times now before this, both in the field and when he was talking on the threshing floor with her. Everybody knows that Ruth is a woman of noble character, he says. And so when he's given an opportunity to sort of take her as a wife, she comes to him and asks, redeem us, his response is not, "Yes, I'll take it," right? It's not to grasp immediately. Again, what is it? It's holding it in an open hand. It's him saying, "Clearly I would like to redeem you. Clearly I would like to take you as a wife. Clearly I would like to do this." But the right thing to do is the thing that's right in the Lord's eyes, I think in this case is what we're supposed to be thinking, is to give this other guy a chance, right? Because it's his responsibility first and foremost. So imagine that. You get the very thing that you want. I get the job offer of the perfect job that I want, and I'm like, actually, no, I think you should offer it to this other guy first. I think he deserves it, right? Like that. Nobody does that. It seems like, right? It's like a very sort of difficult thing, kind of wrap your head around. So he acknowledged the presence of this other kinsman redeemer, and then sort of left it. It's sort of on that person's plate, right? What they're going to do with it. And so I think probably this is something that's important to pull out of Ruth as well, is that is really hard to think about. Again, we're thinking about things that are really crucial, core to your identity. You measure yourself and your worth by them. They're really important, significant needs in your life. And the prescription here is that you hold them loosely and maybe in some cases even allow others the opportunity to take them before you do. That is difficult, I think. I think that's really hard to wrap your mind around. Something, being taken from you, or willingly giving up the thing that's so important to you. I'm reminded of the last sermon that Mike taught before the ecumenical service from Mark, where he talked about the widow that gives like the 2 cents or whatever, and it's everything she had to live on, right? So if anybody ever had a reason to grasp at something and hold tightly to something, it was that widow with those 2 pennies or whatever, right? And what did she do? She held them in an open hand and said, "Lord, take these." That's the picture we get. It's a difficult picture, but it's one worth meditating on and thinking about. Let me read, just to kind of sum this up summarily. I think the picture we get of this other kinsman redeemer is not one where he's like an evil guy or he's some kind of jerk. He's like, well, I'm not going to take on that risk myself. I'm just going to, I don't think that's the picture that we're supposed to get. Let me read a passage from the commentary about this. One can easily imagine, so remember the first thing Boaz said was you redeem the land, right, before he mentioned anything about the widow. And so one can easily imagine him smiling to himself at his good fortune. For very little money, he could carry out a respected family duty and perhaps enhance his civic reputation. Financially, the investment was a bargain without risk. There were no known heirs of Elimelech to reclaim title to the property later, and elderly Naomi was certainly unlikely to produce any. Even the year of Jubilee, were it applicable, would pose no threat to his ownership. Hence, his little investment would develop into years of productive, profitable harvests. It would enlarge the inheritance of his heirs. How could he lose? That's the first picture. No wonder he's like, sure, yeah, of course I'll redeem it. Obviously. That'd be great. Later, he said this, after he finds out about the attachment of Ruth to this. I cannot perform the duty myself, he says. So by this word choice, he stressed not his unwillingness, but his inability to act. He then explained his caution, perhaps even fear. To execute the duties would ruin my own inheritance. That's the reason he gave. The remark probably meant something like, I simply cannot afford it. And that is, any addition to the man's family would ruin his children's inheritance. He would first here buy Naomi's property from assets that were eventually to be part of his estate, only to lose that investment when Ruth's first child claimed it, presumably without cost, as Elimelech's heir. Meanwhile, that child's care and feeding would further drain his wealth. Similarly, besides the loss of investment in land and child, he may have faced additional expense in caring for Ruth, other children born to her, and Naomi too. Had he bought only the property, he would not only have enlarged his inheritance, but recouped his initial investment from its produce. Hence, the prospect of a wasted investment, whether it is its social or whatever its social value, plus additional mouths to feed, proved too expensive for him. The cost would be even greater if, besides inheriting Elimelech's estate, Ruth's firstborn were also to inherit a share of the kinsman's own legacy. In that case, his inheritance would be divided among more children, each receiving a smaller part. And so here's the conclusion. And here's the picture, I think, that we get back here. I think we have 2 contrasts between people that are faced with the very same choice in the book of Ruth. One was way back in chapter 1, where we had Ruth and we had Orpah, right? And they were both faced with this choice of following Naomi. What did Orpah do? Orpah fulfilled all of her duties. She mourned. She was willing to stay with Naomi. She was willing to go back to Bethlehem. Naomi was like, don't come back to Bethlehem with me. Go back to Moab. And she was like, no, I'm coming with you. Like, she really was willing to do that. And it wasn't until Naomi sort of officially kisses her on the forehead, sends her on her way, like officially releases her and says, you have no further obligations to me. It wasn't until that point that Orpah left, right? So what do we have? We have Orpah fulfilling her duty, satisfying her duty in that sense. We'll call that ordinary hesed. Hesed is this idea of like loyal love, right? Call that ordinary hesed. Contrast that with what Ruth did. What Ruth did was extraordinary hesed. Ruth said, I hear and I appreciate that you have released me from all my duties to you, that I have no more responsibility for you, but I will cling to you nonetheless, right? And not only that, I will cling to you through all of this story that we've read, right? Options to pick up a husband along the way, whatever, pursue other interests along the way, didn't do it. Consistently and with devotion, held on to her loyalty to Naomi through all of that. Same thing is happening now with, I think, Boaz and this other kinsman redeemer. And the picture, I think, is supposed to be that other kinsman redeemer took the request seriously, thought about it, and maybe just couldn't afford it at the end of the day, and so couldn't take that risk. Boaz, in the same situation, took up that cause, right, and redeemed Naomi, and Ruth and Naomi. And so what's the picture? The picture is Boaz going above and beyond the call of duty in this sense, like being, it wasn't like a legal obligation where he had to redeem them in a certain way, anything like that. It was something he was willing to do. Okay, so don't lose sight of the fact that, again, probably Boaz might lose money on this deal. This land is going to be inherited by an heir to Elimelech's family, not to his own family, all that stuff. But still, he meets Ruth and Naomi's request, meets their need with immediate, uncompromising, and radical generosity. Okay. So let's go to this next section. We'll wrap these last ones up a little quickly here. Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself," and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Malon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Malon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord bless the woman who is coming into your home, like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring of the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." What's interesting, and I'm going to go to the next section here, read the last part of this too. What's interesting is none of the characters in this story probably ever had any inkling of the implications of their actions. So we're going to see here in a second what this leads to. King David is what it leads to. A solution to those big picture problems about people doing what's right in their own eyes and Israel having no king. That's what all of this leads to. That's the problem that's being solved here. Ruth, Boaz, Naomi probably are all dead long before any of them have any inkling that they're a part of that plan. I think that's a really interesting picture. If you ever have a question of like a desire to do something significant for the Lord, you probably wouldn't pick this. Remember I said this is an insignificant story, right? And what does that show us? That shows us that you're just terrible at telling what a significant work of the Lord looks like. That's probably the fact of the matter at the end of the day. And I'm just terrible at it, because I would have pointed to Samson pushing down the pillars of the palace or something like that. That was significant, wasn't it? No. Ruth going to the field and saying, "Here's what I need," and Boaz saying, "Yes, I'll give it to you." That was a significant work of the Lord. I think that's a really beautiful picture. Let's go to the last part of this chapter, though. So Boaz took Ruth, this is verse 13. Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, the last thing the women said in this chapter, this group of women, was, "Can this be Naomi?" When she comes back and she's bitter. She's like, "No, I'm not Naomi, I'm bitter." What are we saying now? The women said to Naomi, "Praise the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David, who becomes Israel's greatest earthly king. Okay, so here's what I want to say in conclusion here as I wrap up all this stuff from Ruth. There's a lot of themes here that I think are interesting and important. And so I was thinking, what do I want people to take away from these last 3 weeks? And so I wrote down my thoughts. So what I thought was important, what stood out. I just kind of started writing to see what stands out to me as I think about the story of Ruth. Here's what I came up with, and you're going to notice an important connection here that goes beyond the book of Ruth. One is that part of the reason this story is significant is because it leads to King David. Part of the reason this story is even more significant is because from the line of David comes someone even greater, and which is Christ. And so here's the thoughts that I took away. So take this as my general conclusion. In the midst of human chaos and uncertainty, a time when Israel had no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes, we find the radiant hope of divine compassion in the insignificant town of Bethlehem. This town bore witness to acts of simple yet profound kindness between three insignificant individuals, Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. Acts that unknowingly set the stage for a grand plan orchestrated by God. In this era, in the days when the judges ruled, when society danced to its own discordant tunes, each individual strumming the chords of their own righteousness, we see a symphony of divine faithfulness emerging. It's a melody composed not in grand halls, but in the humble lives of ordinary people. Naomi, a woman who tasted the bitter herbs of loss, walked a path paved with hardship. She was emptied, drained to the core, stripped of her identity, a vessel longing to be filled. Her journey was not in vain, for it led her to a transformative blessing, a blessing so rich and abundant that it did not only overflow into her life, but rippled outwards, saturating, eventually, the lives of an entire nation, and eventually, the whole world, Jew and Gentile alike. From this narrative of despair turned to hope emerges the lineage of a king, the celebrated King David. He was a man cherished by God, a man after God's own heart, and yet a man who had his own encounter with the depths of human frailty. So even he, the great King David, found himself falling short in addressing the profound need of his people, the need for redemption from their own moral decay. Yet this seemingly humble story of two women in Bethlehem did not end with David. Like a small seed planted in the earth, their story would grow into a tree of life, bringing forth the ultimate expression of God's love and faithfulness. From the lineage of David would come another, the one who would bear the weight of humanity's frailty. As we read in Isaiah 11, in that day the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples. The nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. In that day the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people. Later in chapter 53, Isaiah adds, "But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." This descendant would embody the ultimate love, descending into the abyss of death, bearing our sins, our wounds, and our sorrows. Yet death could not hold him. He would rise triumphant, conquering the grave, ascending to the heavens, and sitting at the right hand of God the Father. There he intercedes for us, standing as our advocate against the righteous judgment of God, a testament to his unfailing love and grace. Like Boaz redeemed Ruth, this descendant of David, Jesus Christ, would do the work necessary to redeem all of humanity, standing as our eternal kinsman redeemer. He turns our tales of despair into narratives of hope, replacing our discordant tunes with a melody of redemption. This is the heart of the gospel, the good news, born from an insignificant story of love and faithfulness in the small town of Bethlehem. I think that's the story that I get from the book of Ruth, and I think it's a significant one. So let me say a word of prayer for us as the worship team comes up. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your gracious love, your loyal dedication, your endless pursuit of us. Lord, we thank you for the ways that you work. Oftentimes, before we even recognize a problem, you're spinning a solution, Lord. Pray that you would give us the wit to see it. We pray that you would give us the strength to praise your goodness when times are tough. Pray that you would give us the humility not to get too high when times are good, Lord, but that we would see you as the ultimate provider, as the ultimate caregiver. We thank you for all this. In your name we pray. Amen.